Thank you, Sydney, and thank you to each of you for joining us here today. We are very grateful to have Deputy Secretary Josh Benton from Kentucky's Education and Workforce Development Cabinet to join us. This is a very odd time for all of us. I think that that can't be understated. But what I do know is that we are all in this together, and we are working for you every day at GLI to bring you valuable information to help you during this unique time in our country's history. We want to support you to the greatest degree possible. We have gotten a lot of questions on unemployment insurance, and that is why we have asked Josh to be with us today. So Sydney mentioned that we are going to be using the chat feature. At the end of Josh's presentation, we are going to be asking Iris Wilbur-Glick, GLI's VP of Government Affairs, to moderate the Q&A portion. We're going to try to get to as many questions as we can. But again, we are grateful to Deputy Secretary Josh Benton for being with us today. Thank you, Josh, for your leadership and the administration's leadership. And I won't delay any further. I will just ask you to proceed with sharing some information with us today.
Thank you, Sarah. Glad to join you all today, and I appreciate all those who are on the meeting as well. Just echoing what Sarah said, this is very much an unusual time that, just from an economic perspective, from a public health perspective, that none of us have ever experienced before. And so, it's unique, and we are, working together throughout government, as well as, across, partnerships with chambers. At the state level, we always have a strong partnership with the Kentucky Chamber, but in this, that Kentucky Chamber has been a great partner to us. We're in the middle of a partnership to promote job opportunities in the middle of this. I know that GLI and Kentuckians Works are doing the same type of endeavor to just promote the employers that do have openings right now. It's just we're finding ways that we can work more collaboratively, in addition to pushing out information about how employers can manufacture different products in the short term and that sort of thing. So we're very appreciative of our partnerships and with the chamber networks across the state, both from the state level as well as our local workforce partners and their chambers. So we're very appreciative. Today, what I'll do is highlight just some of the steps that we're taking to address unemployment insurance. Again, just as a unique time, we know that right now we have a significant number of companies who have never laid people off before, as well as a number of individuals who have never experienced job loss. So it's a unique situation, one that we anticipate, being a temporary situation, and we all wish we knew the time frame of that this is going to last, but we do know that no matter what, it is going to be a temporary situation. So we want to provide information on the steps that we've taken on unemployment insurance, as well as some specific things for employers to know. And then I'll also talk a little bit about the legislation that's going through Congress right now and the implications that might have for UI as well. So first, just to highlight some things that we've done over the last really just a week and a half, 2 weeks, to make sure that unemployment insurance is available to as many people as possible right now that are experiencing job loss. So some things that initially we did was, one, to waive the 1 week waiting period. And I know that that's been a little bit confusing for folks, but just to explain what that means a little bit. So under normal circumstances, if someone loses their job and they're filing for unemployment, they have to wait a week. And during that week, our office does due diligence on the claim, verification. We verify information with their employer to make sure all the information matches up. And then after that waiting week, we can begin paying out the claim. What the waiting week really means is that that individual, for their first UI benefit payment, only receives a payment for 1 week. Um, Typically, um, all UI payments are for a 2 week pay period, if you will. But the waiting week meant that someone who was filing a claim um, could not receive the first week of benefit. It didn't change their duration or anything like that. It just delayed the start of the payments a week. So waiving that means that an individual who files a claim will receive a full 2 week benefit payment um, for their first payment instead of just a 1 week payment. So that was the first thing that we did. We also waived a couple of other items. One, we are assuming right now that uh, under normal circumstances that everyone applying for UI is available to and willing to work. That's something that um, that is just a requirement and a statement that anyone applying for UI would have to identify if they were available and willing to work. We are assuming that everyone is right now. Obviously, if we weren't experiencing COVID-19, most of the people, the vast majority of people who've lost their job over the last 2 weeks would still be working. And so we are just assuming that everyone is able and available. And then we've also suspended during the state of emergency the work search requirement. Um, Again, typically, um, if someone loses their job, most of the time it's a permanent separation, and they are required to search for work while they're on UI. We're suspending that because we're hopeful that all of these, the vast majority of these layoffs, are going to be temporary in nature. Excuse me. A couple of additional items that we took action on this week. We really increased the amount of people that could be eligible for unemployment insurance. So the first is every state has a good cause provision that says that if someone leaves their employment, we have parameters on what good cause might be so that they could still receive unemployment insurance. We have included in that self-quarantine, or if someone had to leave their job to care for a family member. If they may not have been diagnosed with COVID-19, but if they experience job loss because they've been exposed to the infection, or are concerned that they were exposed to the infection and need to go into self-quarantine, or if they're taking care of a family member with the virus, then that's reasonable in our mind, and they would qualify for unemployment insurance. The biggest and most impactful is that we expanded UI coverage to individuals that typically do not qualify. So that's not a specific group of people, but it includes a number of different situations, including individuals who are self-employed, independent contractors, or work for an organization that typically does not pay into the UI tax system. So specifically, that includes childcare workers that the child care center is attached to a religious or nonprofit organization. It's a large group of people that were laid off last week that work for child care facilities. So that was expanded, but essentially, that provision allows for anyone who does not typically participate in the unemployment insurance system because they or their employer do not pay the UI tax, are going to be eligible during the state of emergency. We think that's the right thing to do. And there's some federal legislation that is supportive of that action, as well as guidance that we've received from the Department of Labor. Just to kind of walk through the unemployment insurance process. There are a couple of different scenarios that I think employers in particular need to be aware of. Um, First, our normal process is if someone loses their job, they would go individually apply for unemployment insurance. As I mentioned a minute ago, when we receive a claim, one of the first things we do is work with their employer or employers in their work history to verify their employment information. And so during that course of time, someone from our office will reach out to an employer to just make sure that the information we receive from a claimant matches up with the employer's records. That's still happening, obviously. We're having a number of individuals file independently. But what we want to make employers aware of is that we have loosened our restrictions for mass layoff or large scale layoff. We call this the e-claims process. So in this circumstance, if there is an employer of 50 employees or more that is laying off at least 15 people, we are encouraging them to file claims through the e-claims process. So what that means is that the individual that's being laid off does not have to independently file a claim. Our office works with the employer to receive information on those that are going to be laid off, and that starts the claims process for that individual. They will then receive information on how to request a benefit payment after the initial filing. So if there are employers out there who, again, haven't done this before or did not previously qualify for this process, again, if you're an employer of at least 50 employees and you're going to lay off at least 15 people, we're encouraging the e-claims process. And you can get information on how to do that. I'm going to give you an email address. It is uieclaims@ky.gov. So that's uieclaims@ky.gov. This is a very efficient process. It's much more efficient than an individual filing that someone might do. And so we are encouraging employers to do that. We also want to be as flexible as possible. Something that we haven't always promoted or participated in are work share programs, but that is an option for employers. And so what that means is if someone or an employer is working with their employees, they want to keep them employed throughout this, but it may come at a reduction of work hours and pay, then they can participate in a work share program. So with that reduction of hours, it would be a combination of the company paying the individuals and the individual receiving benefits for their reduced time. Again, we can do this through the e-claims process. If you're 50 employees and it's going to impact at least 15 people, we can do that through the e-claims process. But if not, and you're a smaller company and you'd still like to participate in that, I'm going to give you a different email address to reach out to. That is workforce@ky.gov. Workforce@ky.gov, and just ask about WorkShare, and we'll get you set up with WorkShare. So again, we want to encourage the e-claims process. We are, the way we look at this right now, there's a lot of different terminology that's used, but we're treating everything as temporary at the moment. So that includes things like a temporary layoff, like you see with a lot of large manufacturers. If it's only going to be a 2-week situation or a 4-week situation, that we'll work with that and glad to process. So some people call that furlough. But if it's going to cause a loss of pay for that individual, either completely or partially, we'll work with them um, in that process. So just a couple of other things to be aware of. We have a lot of questions um, about the employer tax rate and what's going to um, and what's going to happen with that employer tax rate. So we want to be sensitive to that. There's a couple of things that go into um, the employer tax rate. One, obviously, is if an individual loses their job, typically what happens is that we charge that to the employer's account. What we're doing right now is that we are not charging employer accounts on a temporary basis. Because we think this is a temporary situation, we are not going to charge employer accounts right now. So just using UI is not going to have an impact. The second piece to keep in mind is what really impacts the employer tax rate is the health of our unemployment insurance trust fund. And so we are taking every measure possible to try to keep the trust fund healthy, but also keep employer tax rates low. So a lot of the legislation that you're seeing coming out of Congress right now provides supports for the trust fund, provides direct reimbursement for individuals who are being laid off back to states. So we hope between both of those efforts of not charging employer accounts specifically, but just charging the pool, if you will, then we are hopeful to keep the trust fund healthy and the employer tax rates low. There's a couple of other things that are still being worked out just to make you aware of. One is, individuals that that may have lost their job before all of this happened, and either they're on unemployment insurance right now or their benefits just expired. So there's a couple of things that we're doing. One, we were just given the green light to request an extension so that individuals that are currently on UI or were on it before, before this all happened, that we're going to have a mechanism very soon to be able to extend their benefits. In addition, one of the bills in Congress right now is going to allow individuals who have just come off of UI and didn't find a job, or they did and got laid off again, it's going to allow them to reapply. So we're waiting on those mechanisms to come into play. It will also give some flexibility on the terms of their work history and things like that, just so we can make sure we can cover as many people as possible. Just to reiterate a couple of things, one on e-claims. If you're an employer of 50 or more and you're laying off at least 15, we want to encourage you to go through the e-claims process, UI e-claims at ky.gov. And again, on terminology, layoff, short-term layoff, furlough, all means the same thing. And so if there is an employment separation where that's going to impact on a temporary or permanent basis that individual's employment status and pay, go ahead and file through that e-claims process if you meet those numbers of employment and layoff. For everyone else that's under 50 or is not experiencing a layoff of that many, then it's the burden to apply is on the individual being laid off. What the employer has to do is just verify the information that the individual submits. After they apply, our office reaches out to employers directly to verify that information, and then we proceed with the claim. So there's two different processes. One is a direct, that e-claims process is employer directed, and then the individual claims process is the individual's responsibility to file. So with that, that's just kind of a summary of what we've done and the different options for filing. And am happy to, um, you know, answer the questions that are coming in through chat, or Iris, if you have any in specific that we need to talk about.
Great. Thank you so much, Josh, for that overview and that presentation. I'll give you a moment to breathe and take a sip of water. Great questions are coming through. Our teams are now going through and trying to organize them by topic. We have some repetition here. And so I'm going to go ahead and get things started. Those of you on the line, please use the chat feature, type your question, and we're going to do our best to maximize time here. So one question that we received, you talked about the partial wage replacement, the work share. Are there requirements that need to be met in order to utilize UI in this way?
Sure. So that one is a bit of a unique process. And so if there's an employer that would like information on work share, we will need a little bit additional information. So we'll need to know not just the individuals that are going to be affected and the different positions involved and their pay classifications and all of that, but we'll need to know the pay differential, if you will, how much their pay and hours are being reduced, and that'll help us factor in what their eligible UI benefit will be. But we do on a cost or a work share, excuse me, we will work with that employer to work through those scenarios so that we can make sure that all those details are covered. So there is a little bit additional information involved from that front, but our team, works with employers. The thing that's a little bit challenging to give just a blanket answer on some of this is that employers have different HR policies and procedures and requirements that we have to work with in these scenarios, whether it comes to benefits or work hours or anything of that nature. And so the general answer is for work share, we need to know the employees that are going to be impacted and what that hour and wage reduction looks like. That helps us calculate the benefit amount. But essentially then once that's done, the benefit payment isn't any different than it is for anyone else.
Okay, great. Thank you for that guidance. On to the next question. Obviously, the federal stimulus package, it has not been signed into law yet. We know that the House of Representatives are actually debating the bill as we speak. Assuming it seeks that final passage and the president signs that bill into law, we know more changes are coming. One in particular is the provision for the federal government to provide an additional $600 per individual. Can you speak on that and how that may impact certain types of beneficiaries, particularly scenarios where are people making more money versus when they were employed? And does the state have sort of safeguards or accountability to make sure that we don't have sort of unintended consequences regarding employment opportunities?
Sure. So, and that's been obviously a source of debate in the Senate. I'm sure it is in the House as well on that $600 amount. The way I understand it right now is that the federal government will be providing additional resources to just add that amount to everyone's benefit. So the way we are approaching this is, during the state of emergency, we are considering everyone as a temporary layoff, essentially. And so if when the state of emergency ends, or if an employer calls their employees back, it would, and that individual does not go back to work, then it moves to a permanent layoff. So the expectation and the way that we have set this up is that when the employer reopens and can bring people back to work, that that temporary situation is over, and that individuals will either go into a permanent layoff or they'll go back to work. So that's we may look into that a little bit further. We'll have a little bit of gap to see what the legislation really, the details of that legislation really are, and if there's, changes that we need to make from a state policy or things that we need to review, we'll do that. We'll see what guidance comes from the Department of Labor. But obviously, when things open back up, we want folks to go back to work and get things moving again. But we'll take a look at the details of what that legislation calls for and allows, and what flexibility states have. But again, we're treating everything like a temporary layoff right now.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Sort of a spinoff off that question. We're getting a couple of questions about, how long can Kentucky sort of sustain, right? Things are changing, evolving. We're getting assistance from the federal government. Can you sort of comment on Kentucky's current capacity and potentially, maybe some opportunities or challenges in the near term versus the long term?
Sure. So the sustainability of where we're going, especially from a UI perspective, is, the federal legislation, one that was passed last week, and then what's going through right now. It provides some safeguards financially for states. It provides a significant amount of reimbursement to some of the flexibilities that we're providing, and it also provides some security to the trust fund. So we need that to have some sustainability long term. As long as this goes on, we need those safeguards in place to make sure that our UI system's sustainable. There's no doubt about that.
Those that are on the line participating, we also have a couple of hyperlinks that we will share with the group. I also want to take a moment to encourage folks to go to greaterlouisville.com and click our COVID-19 resource page. There we've assembled some frequently asked questions specific to UI, in addition to some hyperlinks and summaries. And so those of you that have questions, resources are available on our website that we have linked to Josh's cabinet. So I also wanted to offer that as well in the meantime. One question, Josh, that we have received regarding the good clause provision that you mentioned at the top of the call. Can you kind of emphasize some additional details on that and
Sure.
some things that employers need to be aware of?
Sure. So, there's been a couple of scenarios, and this is really an employee protection that, especially because the federal legislation that was passed last week that calls for protections on these two issues hasn't gone into play yet. So we know that there are people that have had separation from their employment because they've either had to go into self-quarantine or because they felt like they needed to take care of a family member that had the virus. And so this is a safeguard for them. Because we're not charging against the employer account right now, it's not going to impact the employer negatively. But going forward, I believe after April 1st or April 3rd, I forget the day of when the last week's federal legislation goes into effect. It'll have resources for both individuals and employers who are experiencing these scenarios. So this is really a measure just in the interim that we can provide unemployment insurance for individuals that may have lost their job. So and this situation, that the employee may be stepping away from their job, and so we want to make sure they have the resources that they need in the interim. But they would just need to apply for unemployment insurance, just like anyone else would.
Okay. Another question I'm reading here: if someone loses their job right now for reasons completely unrelated to this pandemic, do all the new changes apply?
So that's a good question. And so we are still, there have been a couple of situations where we are treating this as a permanent job loss. And so that is getting worked out in that verification of information process after a claim is filed. So if someone loses their job, and we're working with the employer, and in the course of that action we realize that this is a permanent job loss, then there's going to be some things that are going to be more normal, if you will. But what we don't know yet is some of the new federal resources, if they're going to apply to everyone or just those that are impacted by COVID-19. So we are working some of that out during the verification process after a claim is filed. And so someone still could be considered a permanent layoff, or someone could be experiencing permanent job loss during this time, to answer that question.
Thank you for that clarification. One question we've also received, now that there are changes coming regarding independent contractors, 1099s, one question we received is that when that individual, the employee, first made the claim, the employer denied that claim. Now, obviously, things have changed. Would your advice be for that individual to reapply for UI so that employer can come back through?
They do not have to reapply. We still have their application. If it happened since March the 6th, then they do not have to reapply. We still have their application, and essentially they may have even already received a determination letter. But I know we've already started reaching out to some of those folks since Wednesday night to let them know that we've reopened their claim, and we'll begin processing it.
Great, thank you. Some questions regarding are the new filing procedures working? Also, the schedule, sort of the structure. Are we expecting additional process changes?
Sure. Hopefully not. We have had, obviously last Monday was I'll talk a little bit about some of the process changes and how they're working, and some additional things from really a customer service perspective that we're working on. So last Monday, our system was only set up to be able to handle 1,000 claims at a time. And obviously, we had a lot more than that start rolling in on Monday. So we have drastically increased our server capacity. We've also developed a backup application. So if the server is overwhelmed, then there will be an alternative application that someone can file and not lose any time on that. So from that perspective, the system itself, the online application process is working. The issue that we're working on right now, and really for the last week, we have been daily adding capacity to our phone lines. We know that the phones are backed up. We're adding capacity. We added, I believe, 50 more people today, and we'll be adding a significant increase as well on Monday and Tuesday of next week to make sure that we can answer the phones. The other areas that we're working at, we've increased a chat function so that if someone would rather do an online chat, we can help them with that. Questions with UI, we can go into that functionality as well. So we're trying to expand that as much as possible. Also, we're partnering with our local workforce boards across the state more than we ever have. They've been a great help to us in this process. Typically only state staff and personnel assist with UI, but we've pushed out in agreement with our local areas, local numbers, so that whether it's our staff in a career center or our local partners can be assisting folks on the phone. So we're trying to get as many avenues as possible for folks. But in terms of other processes, I don't know. I hate to say no because you know it was often a daily change to a lot of processes that stabilized over the last couple of days. There could be some additional process changes depending upon what some of this federal legislation has in store. But for right now, we have the e-claim process and the process for individual claimants.
Very good, very good. And we've been able to distribute the Louisville region contact information if employers or individuals have had questions. And so we'll be sure to redistribute that contact if and when folks find that helpful. Josh, another question for you. I'm just going to read this one verbatim so I don't leave anything out. If an employee was sent home to quarantine in place for a 2-week period and they're covered by that employer's current paid sick leave or short-term medical leave, you know, will they qualify for UI? Sort of the dynamics of the paid leave provisions that we're experiencing in conjunction with unemployment insurance.
Sure. So the only way, if there was not a separation of employment for that sick leave, then the answer is no, unless there was a change in wages as well, and so that could be, you know, potentially a work share situation. But it's only that UI situation only comes when there's either a separation of employment or a temporary, either permanent or temporary situation where that person's not getting paid or has a reduction in pay.
Sure. That is a very important distinction. And we'll make sure our team, when we write up a summary of today's chat, that we help sort of make that distinction and clearly define that. We believe that's a very important detail there.
And I'll say too, I mean, obviously the governor publicly is encouraging as many employers as possible to be as accommodating, but we know that not everyone can, or that not everyone will. So we just want to make sure that those individuals are covered. But we are extremely appreciative of the employers that are able to provide that extended sick time or the work from home provisions that so many companies have made to try to prevent as much layoff as possible. That's a huge help for all of us.
I know that there's been some preliminary reports, and I know the media has had an interest, but we've received some questions. Do we know approximately how many people in Kentucky have applied and how many are currently receiving UI benefits?
Sure. So just to give a little bit of context, for the past really 2 or 3 years, we have averaged around 2,000 claims a week. You know, what's been reported, you know, we can only report kind of a week behind just based upon federal law. But it was last week was the number that's being reported was over 45,000. So it was a significant increase, and we're experiencing increased, you know, applicants this week as well.
Understood.
I mean, there's an interesting graph for those of you that are. There's an NPR article yesterday that showed, just from a national perspective, claims per week, and it's unbelievable. I mean, in our country's history, we've not seen anything like this.
What are some things that businesses can do now to support the cabinet, to support sort of efforts? I mean, obviously, it's really important for the chambers, for instance, to educate employers, to streamline the process. But are there other, you know, tidbits or ways that we can contribute to the effort?
Sure. So I think, you know, for companies that are laying off, you know, if you at all possible qualify for e-claim, encourage you to do that. But for those that aren't, you know, if there are companies that are hiring, you know, the governor released in an executive order this week, those kind of essential industry part of our economy. If you're hiring, I know, like I mentioned earlier, I know GLI and Kentuckians Works is working together to get information on job postings. We're working with the Kentucky Chamber to do more of a statewide perspective on employers that are hiring. You know, help us with that. If you are hiring, we want to be able to show that there are still opportunities out there. We get a lot of questions on employers that want to help and making alternative products. And so I know that the chambers around the state have been collecting information and running that through Kentucky Emergency Management. If there are options where employers can use their area of expertise to help develop the products that we're short of right now, we would encourage you to consider that. We're in need for those PPE items, and so we're appreciative of those that for the distilleries that are now making hand sanitizer, or the 3D printing organizations that are making the masks for the medical personnel. You know, we're grateful for those that can participate in that way.
Great. Yes. And we'll help distribute some links for our participants to get more information. Thank you for the plug. Our partnership with Kentuckians Works. We're doing everything we can to kind of share that message and make those connections. Another question that we just received, are there future changes to the system that might be needed if, obviously, as things progress? Are there some changes that Kentucky's unemployment insurance program will be seeking to help the process to expedite? Are there things that you all are in need of?
Sure. So, you know, the governor has mentioned this in his press conferences is, you know, we are working, whether it's unemployment insurance, SNAP, Medicaid, you know, all of these different assistance programs. They weren't built for this. And so we're doing a lot of really flexible things with them right now that have not been done before. And I think in the course of that, we're going to learn about, you know, that it's time to talk about some potential needed change to these programs to make them more modern. And so I'm hopeful we're able to have that conversation. We're learning a lot right now about, you know, things that need to change, that need to modernize. So as we always do when we go down that path of, you know, talking about change, we always want employers, chambers to participate in that process.
And sort of on the same note, as you may know, GLI, we're a bi-state chamber of commerce. And so a good portion of our chamber membership has some kind of affiliation, presence, footprint in Southern Indiana. Are there things that we're hearing or observing from our surrounding states, good, bad, indifferent, that we need to keep part of this conversation?
Sure. Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because something that employers and employees need to know is that when it comes to filing, and then I'll answer your question, is that individuals should file in the state that they are employed in. I think that's something that we've got a lot of questions on, and just is important for folks to remember that they should file in the state that they're employed in. You know, sometimes we get, you know, filings that go to the wrong state, and we work that out. But if that can be handled beforehand, that's an important distinction. You know, I think what we're finding is that from Kentucky's perspective in our response to COVID, we've been pretty aggressive in loosening some of the restrictions about UI. We're trying to catch our operational side up as quickly as we can to be responsive. But you know, we've been talking to, you know, our counterparts in other states, and I think we're, you know, really on the forefront of loosening restrictions and making sure that as many as possible can apply and qualify, especially for unemployment insurance. We're trying to work some things out with our partners in the Cabinet for Health and Family Services, so that if someone qualifies for UI and they also are going to qualify for Medicaid or SNAP or something of that we can work out a referral. So we're the last thing we want to do is for someone to have to go through an application process for one and then have to go into another time-consuming application process for another. So we're working on those efficiencies as we speak.
Great. Well, thank you, Josh. I'm gonna let you sort of relax a bit. If you can make sort of any closing remarks for the group here, in conjunction, provide any additional phone numbers, website addresses, and or I know that you mentioned that there could be there's a chat feature on the UI website. Any additional resources that our folks may need, this would be a great opportunity to share that information.
Sure. So I think just in terms of just kind of closing remarks, we really just appreciate the partnership with Chambers as well as the business community in this. When we say that we're in this together, we truly mean that, and our cabinet serves in a unique position of having two customers, one being the employer community, and one being individuals around the state. And so we want to serve both of them well. You know, that's obviously being stretched right now because just of capacity issues. But just know that we're having all hands on deck approach right now, and trying to make sure that these services are delivered as efficiently as possible to those who need them the most. And I'll just reiterate a couple of contacts. You know, if you're interested in the e-claims process, UI eClaims at ky.gov, and then just general questions about from the business perspective, workforce at ky.gov, I think is the easiest way for us to quarterback inquiries that are coming in from around the state. But again, appreciate the opportunity, and if there's additional feedback or anything that we can help with after this, we're happy to do it.
Terrific. Thanks again, Josh, for your leadership and for being available today with our members. Those of you that are participating, we are still receiving questions, and we'll be able to archive the chat. And so if you do have additional questions, we're going to do our best to compile all of that. I also want to encourage participants to visit our website. That would be greaterlouisville.com. There's a COVID-19 resource page. There we've compiled lots of different resources and hyperlinked to the appropriate local, state, and or federal government contacts. We'll include a lot of the information from today. We'll do a wrap up and distribute that in our future newsletters and on the website. So again, that's greaterlouisville.com, and go to our COVID-19 resource page. There's also opportunities for you to reach out to staff. And so those of you that have questions beyond unemployment insurance, there's a contact link so our staff can help you with specific questions. Thanks again to Josh for his guidance, presentation, and feedback. And so now I'd like to turn it back over to Sarah for closing remarks.
Thank you, Josh, and thank you, Iris. I found this session to be very, very beneficial. I want to just remind everyone that we do have another webinar coming up on Monday regarding small business assistance. This is regarding the SBA loans that have been announced. We will also be announcing in the next couple of days a couple of more industry roundtables that are around specific industries. We had one around the hospitality industry on Monday that received favorable feedback. People indicated that it was helpful to get together as an industry and collaborate and come up with questions and ideas and suggestions. So we will be doing that for the manufacturing sector and also the healthcare sector in the coming days. So thank you for joining us. We are working hard to make sure that we can help business as much as possible right now and plan for how our community can prepare for a time after COVID-19. Thank you for joining us today.